What's up, y'all? I'm KC.
I'm Tyler.
And this is our Louisiana E-Scout. Hey, you're gonna need some Onyx before you get on this thing, so check that out below. Tyler,
yeah.
How do you hunt deer?
You hunt them with your best ability.
That's right. How do you, Tyler Jones, hunt deer?
I hunt by traveling all over the country most of the time and trying to find new states, new areas, and that kind of thing to kill deer in, because I like the challenge, I like traveling, and I just like the whole experience, right? So
yeah. I hunt deer the same way. And you know what? We have had some success doing that. We're not experts by any means, but we have a lot of experience doing this, okay? So we want to talk about Louisiana today and talk about some of the things you might consider before you decide to go hunting in Louisiana. Really cool state, really exciting state to visit. Lots of great culture there, all kinds of cool stuff, right?
Yeah, I've spent the last couple of seasons actually scouting on X, the state of Louisiana. I haven't hunted there yet, but I've got lots of map time. Actually, we spend most of the summer map scouting.
That's right. More than we should, actually.
It's too hot around here to put boots in the ground, so we just get on the digital maps and do that kind of thing. But there's a couple of things that are notable or that you might want to understand about when you go to Louisiana before you go. These are some things you might need to know, right? So there are things that are legalities. We are not the game warden. We are not the DA. We're none of that, right?
Don't want to be any of that.
Don't check all this with game wardens and whoever, the websites and DNR websites and that kind of thing before. But we're going to try to give you the best rundown of what we understand Louisiana deer hunting to be. And the first thing I've noticed, there are actually 10 zones, I think, that they manage their deer herd through. So I think a lot of them correlate with the different rut zones. Louisiana is one of those weird states, has a lot of different ruts in it, and therefore they correlate deer densities and all of that together to make regulations based around these 10 zones.
It's a great state to visit if you have maybe a weird date of vacation time where they have a season that starts I think in September, like the 18th, and it runs all the way through February. It's going to be like middle of February when their season is over. So you get a really, really wide deer season in Louisiana.
Yeah, so one thing you can do is get an extra rut in there. A lot of the country has a rut that's in early November or just in the month of November, and you can get outside that and still hunt deer that are rutting, which is really cool. And you can hunt them with bow equipment, archery equipment, and you can hunt them with firearms.
That's right. It doesn't matter what kind of hunter you are. If you're the guy that doesn't have enough time to practice archery hunting, you can go out there with your rifle and get you a deer, which is really, really exciting and actually a lot of fun. It's pretty fun to go out and have the satisfaction of dropping one as opposed to having to blood trail it through
It's
the
also
night.
real fun when you've got 3 buck tags in your pocket like you might could have in Louisiana, where you can just be like, oh, that one looks cool, I'm going to shoot it, and then wait for an even bigger one, we don't get to do that sometimes in 1 buck counties or 1 buck states. So
on that note, you kind of make sure you're right on your regulations. Some places may only allow you to take 1 deer from the property or the zone, so be sure and check all this stuff. But overall, you get to take 6 deer home in Louisiana, so that's like a lot of freezer space right there, right? A lot of meat, really, really exciting place to hunt, and probably a lot of deer depending on where you're at in the state.
Yeah, especially if you're hunting near a corn pile, because they have legal baiting in the state of Louisiana, and it looks like you can put a feeder out there and get a bunch of deer coming in and pick one that you like and shoot it, which is pretty cool. Being from Texas, I think that's pretty cool.
That's right, man.
A Michigan person may not think that's really cool, but it's a cool opportunity for people and kids especially to see a lot of deer in a hunt.
And it's a great opportunity to learn a lot about deer. We were talking about that yesterday, actually. If you can sit around a corn pile, you can learn a lot.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of public land in Louisiana, which is really nice. Probably, I don't know, you check the regulations. Most of the time you can't bait on public land, so maybe it doesn't apply there, but if you have some private access, you can. But there's a lot of public land and some different types of public land. You got WMAs, you got national forest, and there's other kinds of creative, unique public opportunities there as well.
Yeah, a lot of that public land is going to be kind of difficult to hunt just because of the nature of the terrain, the floodplain that Louisiana is, the low elevation, all of that. So things that might help you are scents or something like that, or bait, like we talked about. Now, as far as scents go, from what I understand, it has to be ATA approved if it is a natural scent, if it's not a synthetic. So make sure you are notable of that.
We looked up some of this kind of obscure information on the Louisiana regulations website, just so we could all kind of learn about this stuff together, things you may not always think about. But since they do have an early season, they make it where it is illegal to shoot spotted fawns. So if you're going to shoot a tiny little tasty, you got to make sure he doesn't have any white dots on him, okay?
Yep.
So I guess that's because of the September 18th date probably and being in the South. So they have rut dates that are into December. So if you can imagine...
Further than that.
Or I'm sorry, I
February.
meant February.
Yep,
I said
yep.
December, but yeah, February. So
They're waiting on Valentine's Day.
that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And let's see, you can hunt Valentine's Day and the day after. Might be the best time to hunt.
I'm telling you.
Could be. So,
Cupid will be in the tree.
That's right. So it's like 132 days of gestation, right, or something like that. I think for whitetail somewhere in there's 120s or 130s. But anyways,
Not a balance.
you can imagine how tiny a fawn you could find on a 9/18 hunt if it was, conceived in February.
Yeah, here's a weird thing to think about. There are there's a season for hunting with dogs in Louisiana, right? What if your dog attacks a fawn, man?
What do you do?
I don't know.
I guess you gotta have good trained dogs.
If you're gonna be dog hunting down there, you might try to ask a game warden about that before you go.
Overall, Louisiana is known as the sportsman's paradise. They put it on their license plate. They talk about it. People have that mentality down there, right? There's like some saying like blah, 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 which means like take it easy in Louisiana. I can't remember
Let
what
the
it
good
is.
times roll.
Let the good times roll, right?
Yeah.
That they say in some French thing that I can't say, right?
Yeah, laissez-faire or something like
yeah,
that.
exactly. Let them eat cake, I think.
Yeah, that's
But it really does seem like a sportsman's paradise. So let's jump in, check this thing out on the map, and see if we can find a really great place to find some deer.
Okay, so we've got the whole state pulled up right here. And there are 10 zones, like I said, right, Casey?
I've got them pulled up on mine. Onyx lets you layer those, and those actually correlate to certain seasons in Louisiana, but they also correlate to the rut zone map, I think, as well.
Yep, and they have on like the DNR wildlife website, they have a Louisiana estimated deer breeding periods. Apparently this study was done or finished in 2014, so I'm sure it's fairly accurate, but it's been a few years. And it shows basically that there are peak breeding periods based off of, I guess, fawn birth and tracing it back from September 26th through February 26th. So the cooler the color on this map, the later in the season it looks like.
So it looks like the Gulf Coast, southern Gulf Coast stuff, and even just a lot of that western portion of the state are later dates, at least November, or earlier dates, I'm sorry, at least November and back. And then some of that stuff kind of down around Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or in New Orleans is
all the Delta stuff.
Yeah, that's all that southern Delta stuff is definitely the later rut dates. I mean, there's some January, February's in there.
And I'll be honest, when I look at the state of Louisiana, knowing what I know, we're from East Texas, so we kind of have an idea of this. The coastal plain is probably the last place I'm looking for to hunt in this state. So just on a big ride perspective, that's what I look at.
There might be a decent amount of deer down there, but I've lived on the Texas Gulf Coast, which is and very close to Louisiana. And the idea of having a pattern of deer down there just seems atrocious. This stuff down here, this is redfish, flounder, trout country, okay? This is not deer country. You go down there and shoot some snows in the winter, okay? But if you care to explore and you care to go check things out, then it could be fun. The weird thing is you have an early rut, so you're going to have to go down there when it's super hot.
So humid.
And try to shoot deer. Just doesn't seem ideal to me. When I look at the state, my eyes are drawn to the northeastern portion of the state, because I know that this stuff in the northwest has deer, but it's a little harder to hunt because it's kind of just like it is here at home in East Texas, just big woods country. And this stuff over here in the northeast is going to be that Mississippi bottom. You know, it's the biggest river in the country, right? And it's going to be all ag stuff. There's a lot of public land there. There's going to be a decent population of deer in the habitat pockets, and of those deer, they're probably going to be larger body size, larger antler size.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's what same thing with me, right? And I think throughout the whole state, one of the things you're going to battle is water. These deer are going to be used to water too, so they're not afraid to jump off in the water and swim stuff. So you have to look for that, but at the same time, there is a funneling aspect to the water, like often, right? So that's something as a pattern that you can use to your advantage, whether you're in this Mississippi Delta or just anywhere in here, right? Because you're going to see like some of this stuff in like the northwestern portion of the state. It's going to be a lot of pine country. So, you know, for me, I'm looking at a couple of things when it comes to, like, I'm focusing on the Mississippi River and Delta for the most part if I'm going to the state and I'm picking the biggest trophy quality, right? But when I look at like what I might be hunting or what time of year I might be hunting, if I'm looking at pre-rut type stuff, then we're probably thinking like persimmons, if it's anything like at home. We love persimmons here.
And love to eat them and hunt over.
Yeah, exactly. And the deer love eating them too. Also, I think in that like northwestern, north central part of the state, you might encounter some of the more like typical white oaks that you see throughout most of the U.S. We don't actually have like your kind of American white oak here. It's a post oak, and they grow a lot smaller, and they're a lot less favorable for deer.
There'll be chinkapin oaks and swamp chestnuts and swamp white oaks as well throughout a lot of this western stuff. So you will have some good white oaks to drop there, and maybe, like you said, a few of those actual white oaks. This is a ridge right here that runs out, and it's all pines. You can see how they look round, kind of concentric, and like they have a pattern. And then in these ditches, like kind of riparian, it's not really riparian, but it's a ditch, and then there's a riparian area down there. You can see at least there are some hardwoods that have lost their leaves in the fall and winter. Okay, so the odds of these being oak, hickory, something like that are pretty high. Of course, there's American elms, hackberries, all that kind of stuff. But for sure, there are not going to be many oaks, if any at all, in this pine forest that we're looking at here. Yeah. This place in particular, there's been some like selective harvest right here you can see, which might mean that there are, like you can see a couple oaks growing up into that selective harvest.
Could be good browse too in there.
Yes, absolutely.
The sunlight. I wanted to kind of run through some of that western and northern central stuff a little bit before we get to the Delta, just because there's some people that might be
overlook this Red River or whatever this is right here. You know, I know the Mississippi's a big draw, but there's a lot of agriculture along this guy. There's not a ton of public land, but there is a little bit here and there. And it's still one of those things where the river bottom's going to be more fertile, and therefore you're going to have more cropland, larger antler deer, larger body deer, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. So when I think about early season, we're looking at those oaks and the persimmons, like I said. Also, another thing to think about, and this is something that you might encounter more in this Delta type stuff. You get these floodlands, these bayous, these oxbow lakes, right, that are pretty stagnant but hold water most of the year. And you get these water plants that they're easy and palatable, easy for the deer to eat. They're soft. They have a lot of water in them, so the deer don't have to drink water very often. They get their water through their food there. So I would think that water plants could be something in the Delta country that you could focus on. If you're walking past a bayou or an oxbow and you see a bunch of browse in there, it might be something that slows you down and makes you think for a second.
Quite frankly, like look at this place right here too. Being in the south, we'll have soybeans that are still green on into October, and I don't know what the dates are for this particular unit, and it looks like there's maybe a ditch there, but deer there, like we said earlier, will swim. If you got green soybeans in September, you know, you can look for that, like an agriculture, like early season style hunt there that still has beans that are still green. So it's something else to think about for an early season food source as well. One of the things that I've noticed in the south, and even other places that we hunt early season, you think about hunting in the evenings. I know you in particular in the past have expressed how much you like evenings over mornings. I've noticed some too, and I think you've had this experience a little bit lately. Speak differently if so, but early in the year, the temperatures are cooler for longer in the morning. So it seems that on hotter days, if you want decent movement, unless it's at last light, mornings are sometimes better than evenings. So it's something to think about for your earlier season hunts, pre-rut hunts.
Yeah, for sure. So moving into the rut a little bit, you see, if you look if you've got your crop data layer turned on OnX, you can see that there's a lot of corn in this country in the Delta too. Corn is something that could do really well in November, I would think. And if you have that November rut, or really in the south, you know, it could be, who knows when exactly, but any of these ruts that are, you know, anywhere from say mid-October to late December, corn could be something that's very valuable to them, right? So a couple of things I think about during the rut. If you're looking at a rut hunt somewhere in Louisiana, you're trying to find usually funnels, pinches, those kind of things that put a lot of deer coming through a gap that you can shoot. You know, if you're bow hunting especially, you can shoot through that gap, and you're sitting in that area a lot of times all day, right? So a couple of things that I would think of, if you've got a lot of water in bayous like this, you're going to have beavers around. Beaver dams can make for a crossing in between two bayous. All this ag, this corn, these beans, the tractors have to get into these places, right? So there has to be a place, and there's a lot of canals, irrigation ditches around all these ag parcels and stuff, especially when you're hunting a piece of public that borders that ag. A lot of times it's almost always going to have some sort of a canal there, right? So one way to get around that is to hunt that tractor crossing, essentially, that agriculture access to those fields from, you know, different pieces of timber or different roads.
Another thing to think about when you're thinking about rut hunting, is particularly corn, is in the Mississippi Delta, a lot of times it's wet in November and December, and if it's early rain, sometimes the tractors can't get in there to harvest that stuff, and it can be standing for a long period of time, which make for some good hunting.
For sure. So another thing you can think about, Casey and I talk about this, and we hunt this a lot, but it's a creek or river system, or in this case a bayou or oxbow, being almost like a deer highway, right? So if you get a general sense of movement of deer down these more straight shots of canals or creeks or whatever. So, you know, you get into a belt of timber that follows this low creek system that they can't farm, and a lot of times that's a good place to set up where deer will move in, you know, through that and follow that creek system down. It also gives you a good place to blow your wind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you're going to run into on Louisiana public land a lot, especially in the Delta, is flat terrain. You're not going to have hardly any terrain to speak of at all. Maybe you get some terrain on a creek bank or something like that, but overall there's just not going to be much for terrain features to help funnel deer outside of, you know, oxbows, creeks, stuff like that. So creek crossings would be a huge thing to look for too. It would pay pretty good dividends to go up and down a creek like you're talking about and find one of those places where it's either like flatter along the creek bank or whatever that's causing deer to cross in that section, or even a secondary creek crossing. Like right here, you can see where two creeks come together. This seems to be the more major one here on the kind of north and south direction. This one coming from the east is going to be a little bit more minor of a creek. You got a creek horn right here, which makes a really good place to hunt. You know, deer will come and hook around this thing, but also somewhere right in here, I would imagine there's a really quality secondary creek crossing, a really great place to set up, because those deer are going to find the path of least resistance to cross this little ditch.
So looking at a couple of things in the rut and post-rut, and this is what's difficult about Louisiana, is there's not like a statewide post-rut, right? So one, like we talked about, and like KC said at the beginning, you're looking at the northeast portion of this state to really give you the best shot at shooting a trophy deer, right? Well, the rut in that area, according to this map, is going to be in early to mid-December in most cases, maybe even on into January, depending on where you're at. So with that said, when I focus on this stuff, I look at some stuff like right in here that I really like, and we're looking at as the rut is finishing up, or even during the rut, deer are going to start getting back on the feed, right? It's like the same thing as the bass spawn. They get back on the feed after they get off the beds. So this is what deer kind of do too. And when I look at this, I can see some, like, here's the major creek system that's running right here, right? All this ag up here, all this woods down in here, right? Deer are going to move up and down this creek system to get here. So if you can pop in, who knows, you know, you have to look at this point at rut or post-rut, you have to look at human traffic. So if you see boot tracks in here and stuff, then you can pop right back out and be no big deal. But if there's nothing going on in here, you don't see any stands or anything, get right on this creek horn like KC just talked about, and you're going to see a lot of deer come right by you, probably going up to this or back down to this, and you can figure them out which way they're moving in the morning. You can hunt this on, you know, a southwest wind, potentially a southeast wind if it's hard enough east, a straight east, a west, you know, northeast and west. You can kind of make this stuff work if you can figure out kind of which way the deer are going at which time of day.
One of the other things I like about Louisiana is it is the sportsman state, and along with that you have people who are avid outdoorsmen. So they may or may not start getting busy doing other things in the outdoors besides deer hunting, particularly duck hunting this time of year, especially in northern Louisiana into December, right? It's outside of Arkansas, it's about as good as it gets. And some would probably argue that it is as good as it gets.
Oh, yeah.
So one thing that you might find is once you push into December and on, between Christmas and other things going on and people just filling tags, is that you might have the woods more to yourself. You pair that with a place like this right here that's kind of obscure and far from about near anything, but still around the ag. You know, a small place like it's pretty hard to drive 45 minutes to go to this property. I mean, let's just cut a couple of them, but like, for instance, that right there is 151 acres, right? It's pretty hard to want to drive to 151 acres and commit to that. However, it could really pay off because you look at how much ag there is around this thing. This thing screams late season for me. It actually does have a tiny bit of terrain. You can see with I got my hybrid layer turned on right here. You can see that there's a little bit of terrain here around this secondary creek running into this main creek river looking deal right here, bayou, whatever you want to call it. And you look, you got corn, beans, there's even some wheat down here to the south on private. Like, this really has the potential to A, be a great late season place, and B, hold a lot of deer because there's way more food than there is habitat. So in that late season stuff, when the leaves start falling, you could run into a spot where you have a high concentration of deer in a small area because they are really packed in there because of the late season and just lack of cover.
Yeah. One more thing in Louisiana in the late season that I would kind of mention is there are going to be deer feeders that are still feeding that time of year, right? So I've moved over here to the kind of west side of the state here, and I'm looking at some core land. And you look at this, there's pine plantations right in here, and it's mixed with some of this bottomland, which is going to be hackberry and ash and stuff like that, maybe some oaks, and then you've got this, like, you know, flooded kind of cattle pasture or hay pasture here. There's a good chance that some old boy has a feeder down in here in the back corner or something like that, right? And so you come right up to it right here. Look, and you've got some creek systems that are going to funnel deer one way or the other around this. You can set up on this as deer move to that feeder off of this big block of timber, maybe late season. Help yourself out there as well. So there's some really cool opportunities in Louisiana for sure. We're actually not far from Louisiana here in East Texas, and it's something that we've really have wanted to do over the years. It's just hard to squeeze it all into one season sometimes, you know.
Yeah. But seeing that this state is on the Mississippi and has a ton of ag and you can bait, there are some surprises that can be had. Our good friend Chris B was hunting in Louisiana and shot a really solid buck. He got it all on film. So, like, don't think that you're going to Louisiana to shoot small deer. You just might have to wait a little bit before you find the big one, right? But if you weed through them, there are some trophies to be had.
We understand, like, kind of what the general deer look like in Louisiana. They're smaller bodied overall, probably a little bit smaller antlered. There's probably going to be quite a few of them in certain areas where there's ag and stuff like that. It's going to be fun to chase them. They got some good bag limits and stuff like that. And we kind of understand what they're going to look like. But if you don't, you can find, what that looks like. You can click on this video right here. This is a ranch buck. It's one of the bigger bucks I ever had a chance to hunt right here, in East Texas. Is really cool.